Welcome back to my channel. In the previous episode, we saw Diep face an unbearably painful choice when money was placed on the table as a so-called solution and her love was dismissed as something that could be bargained for. But Diep had no idea that the story didn't end there. Because there are things far more dangerous than words. And now, let's begin and see what is happening to Diep next. Diep tucked the bundle of cash deep into her old cloth bag, folding it with great care, as if a single careless moment might make everything go even more wrong. She never intended to keep it, but she still didn't know how to return it to James's father. And what weighed on her most wasn't the money itself. It was the fact that James knew nothing about it. In the days that followed, Diep stayed home more often. Her leg was healing, but James wouldn't let her do any heavy work. He left early and came home late. In the mornings, he took care of meals. In the evenings, he hurried to tidy up, helped Nhi with her homework, then turned to Diep to ask if she was in pain, if she was tired. Every bit of his care was natural, never showy, never demanding. And that was exactly what made Diep feel even more guilty for keeping this secret to herself. She watched James take care of Nhi, listened to the child's clear, ringing laughter when he lifted her high into the air, and her heart felt both warm and heavy at the same time. There were moments when Diep wanted nothing more than to step forward and tell him everything, to talk about that unexpected meeting, about the bundle of cash placed on the table, about the feeling of being looked down on, about a love that had been judged like a commodity that could be traded. But every time she met James's trusting eyes, the words caught in her throat. Night fell. The small house sank into silence. Nhi had fallen asleep long ago. Diep lay facing James. The dim light softened his features, tired yet peaceful. His steady breathing showed how deeply he was asleep, the sleep of someone who had used nearly all his strength that day. Diep propped herself up slightly, as if about to sit up. She thought, maybe she should say it now, but then she hesitated. She was afraid of breaking this fragile calm, afraid of placing yet another burden on James, when he had already endured so much. In the end, Diep lay back down. She turned away, and her tears silently soaked into the pillow. That afternoon, just as James finished his shift, someone came looking for him. Not a familiar face, no name given, just a middle-aged man, neatly dressed, his voice calm, almost cold. He said he wanted to give James something, and that it would only take a few minutes. James hesitated for a moment, but agreed. They stood in a quiet corner, away from the noise of the work site. The man didn't beat around the bush. He didn't threaten. He didn't bother with long explanations. He simply pulled a phone from his pocket, already open to a few photos, and held it out to James. In the photos, Diep sat across from James's father. On the table between them lay a neatly stacked bundle of cash. The shot was taken from a distance, but everything was clear enough. The setting, the moment, the way Diep was sitting, all painfully familiar, enough to make James's chest sink. The man said only 2 sentences, very briefly. She took the money. And this was only the first time. There was no accusation, no provocation, just a statement delivered lightly, as if it were an obvious truth that didn't need debate. That calm certainty made the words more dangerous than any threat. James held the phone, looking at the photos once more. He said nothing. The man didn't wait for a reaction either. He quietly slipped the phone back into his pocket, gave a small nod, as if his task were complete, and turned away. James stood alone in the open yard. The sounds of machines, of people talking, still echoed around him, but to him, everything felt distant. Questions began to crowd his mind. Why hadn't Diep told him anything? Why would she take the money? Why now, when he had already given up so much for her? What hurt James the most wasn't the money in the photos. It was Diep's silence. A silence that suddenly became terrifying when placed beside images so unmistakably clear. James didn't know that behind those photos was a hand acting with great patience. There was no need to push him away from Diep all at once. It was enough to plant a seed of doubt and let him struggle with it on his own. James tried to retrace the past few days. Had Diep changed at all? Had she avoided his gaze? Were there moments when she seemed uneasy, unsettled? He searched through every small detail, every familiar gesture, but found nothing strong enough to conclude that she had been acting with intent. Then other memories surfaced. Mornings when Diep woke early to prepare everything. Times she sat sewing knees close, her hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. The way she looked at him, always full of trust and calm, as if there were nothing in this world that required her to be guarded around him. James remembered that look clearly, a look that didn't know how to lie. He wasn't angry. There was no outburst. Instead, a dull ache slowly spread through his chest. The pain of someone who doesn't know what, or whom, to believe. On one side were the undeniable photographs. On the other were the years they had walked through together, step by step, choice by choice, without a single betrayal. James tightened his grip on the phone. He realized he was afraid. Not afraid that Diep had betrayed him, but afraid that he might be misunderstanding her. Afraid that one hasty decision could be enough to shatter what he had spent his entire youth protecting. James didn't go looking for Diep right away. He didn't call to confront her either. He needed time, not to distance himself from her, but to question his own heart, carefully, honestly. Because if there was one thing James knew for certain, it was this. His love for Diep would never allow him to be angry before he truly listened. James went to see Hung when there was simply too much inside him that he could no longer untangle on his own. No beating around the bush, no holding back. James told him everything. From the unexpected encounter, to the photographs, to the half-belief, half-doubt that pressed heavier against his chest with every passing minute. Hung listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush to react. Now and then he nodded, as if quietly arranging each piece of the puzzle in his mind. When James finished, the room fell into silence for a long while. Hung poured more tea, set the cup in front of James, and only then did he speak. He asked James a very simple question. "What do you think your father wants most in all of this?" James didn't answer right away. He knew the question wasn't looking for an excuse. It was forcing him to face the truth head-on. Together, they broke it down. James's father had never truly been focused on Diep. What he wanted was control over James, to pull him back under his authority. Diep's silence wasn't calculation. It was her familiar choice of bearing the loss herself. Hung spoke plainly, his voice calm but firm. If she were the kind of person who betrays, you would have seen it long ago. You wouldn't need a photograph to tell you that. The words stopped James cold. Hung continued, more slowly. She might be hiding something from you, but not because she's done something wrong, because she's afraid of hurting you, and she doesn't know how to say it yet. James lowered his head. What Hung said wasn't something he'd never considered, but hearing it from someone outside the storm, clear-headed, untouched by emotion, made everything sharper. He thought of Diep's eyes these past few days, tired, weighed down, filled with guilt, yet never once avoiding his gaze. Hung placed a hand on James's shoulder, his voice dropping. "You've given up a lot to live the life you're living now. Don't let a single photo make that choice for you." In that moment, James understood the most important thing. He couldn't control another person's scheme, but he could control his own choice. And that choice, from the very beginning, had always been Diep. James lifted his head. The confusion in his eyes was gone. The pain was still there, but now it had something to lean on. He knew what he had to do next. Not doubt, not silence, but trust. The same way he had trusted Diep from the very first days. As for Diep, she came home from work early that day and picked Nye up, planning to cook a meal and wait for James after his long day. In front of her was a half-finished basket of vegetables, the familiar knife placed neatly beside the cutting board. Everything looked just like any other day, but inside her, it wasn't. Her thoughts kept drifting, refusing to settle. The bundle of money hidden deep in the cloth bag surfaced in her mind, then Mr. Hohn's face, then the cold words from that afternoon, and in the end, every thought led back to James. She wondered what he was doing right now. Was he tired? Was he thinking about her? Had something changed in his eyes that she hadn't noticed yet? Diep held the knife and continued slicing the vegetables. The motion was familiar, automatic, but her mind was far away. Nye sat in the corner of the house, coloring. She called softly, "Ms. Diep." No answer. Nye called again, a little louder, but Diep still didn't hear her. She was lost in the tangle of thoughts, as if the entire kitchen had slipped out of reality. Then it happened, very quickly. The knife slipped. A sharp pain shot through her fingertip. Diep froze and looked down. Blood began to seep out, a deep red spreading across the wooden cutting board. In that instant, every thought came to a sudden stop. Diep let go of the knife and took a sharp breath. The pain was real, undeniably real. She stood still, leaning lightly against the counter. Her heart began to race, not only because of the wound, but because of the overload that had been building inside her for days. In that moment, Diep realized she had been enduring for too long, forcing herself to stay silent, forcing herself to appear fine, forcing herself to protect James from truths he didn't yet know. At that very moment, the wooden door opened softly. James had just stepped into the house when he saw Diep standing by the stove, one hand clutching the other, her face pale. "What happened to you?" He dropped his bag and hurried over. When he saw the cut on Diep's hand, his heart tightened. Without asking another word, James pulled out a chair and told her to sit down. He took the familiar first aid kit, his movements firm yet incredibly gentle, as if even the slightest force might cause her more pain. James cleaned the wound, dried it, and wrapped it carefully. Throughout the whole process, he didn't say much, but his eyes never left the small hand that was trembling slightly in his. When he finished, James finally looked up at Diep, his voice lower. "I know already." Diep froze. She lowered her head, lips pressed tightly together. Everything she had tried to hide suddenly surged to the surface. Seeing her reaction, James continued, slowly but clearly, "Why didn't you tell me?" Diep looked at him, her eyes red and brimming. Her voice trembled as she finally spoke. She told him about the unexpected meeting, about the bundle of money placed on the table, about the humiliation, about how her love for him had been treated like something that could be bought and sold. The words poured out, heavy with long-held resentment, each sentence breaking slightly as she spoke. "I was scared," Diep whispered. "I was scared you'd have more to carry, scared you'd be torn between too many things." James lifted his hand and gently wiped away her tears. There was no anger in his eyes, only pain and tenderness. He pulled Diep closer and held her against his chest. His heartbeat was steady, strong, like a reassurance that didn't need words. "I trust you," James said softly. I trust that you didn't do those things, and I don't want you to carry this alone. Diep broke down in tears, not out of weakness, but because for the first time in many days, she was finally allowed to let go. She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling that familiar, undeniable sense of safety. They held each other for a long time without needing to say anything more. In that moment, they both understood. Ahead of them were still many hardships, many unnamed trials. But at least between them, trust remained intact. And that trust spoke louder than any photograph, any scheme waiting in the shadows beyond their door. Just as Diep's sobbing began to fade, a small hand gently touched hers. Nai was standing right beside her. No one knew when she had come, her round eyes watching the two adults holding each other. The little girl didn't fully understand what was happening. She only sensed that Aunt Diep was sad. Nai looked up and asked timidly, Aunt Diep, why are you crying? Diep startled slightly and turned toward her. She hurriedly wiped her tears, forcing a small smile. But Nai had already reached up, using her tiny finger to gently wipe away the remaining tear on Diep's cheek, exactly the way James had just done. The clumsy yet sincere gesture softened Diep's heart completely. I'm okay, Diep said softly. I'm crying because I'm happy. Nai tilted her head, clearly not fully understanding, but then she smiled and nodded as if she had accepted the explanation. She climbed onto the chair, scooted closer to Diep, and rested her head against Diep's arm. That small presence, without a single word of comfort, was enough to make the house feel warmer. James watched the scene, and something inside him grew still. He realized that amid all the storms created by adults, there were still pure things that remained. Things untouched by money, status, or calculation. Simply love. Diep wrapped her arms around Nai, feeling the very real warmth of the child. She understood that even though many challenges still lay ahead, as long as moments like this existed within this home, they still had a reason to keep going. It wasn't a grand moment. No one spoke about the future, and no promises were made. Yet it was precisely this simplicity that became the most powerful kind of healing, reminding them that amid all the wounds, family is still where hope begins. Night fell very slowly. The small house gradually sank into silence. Diep was already asleep, her breathing steady after a long day filled with emotion. Nai, too, was curled up under her blanket, her childlike face peaceful, as if she had never known the conflicts of the adult world. James quietly slid the door open and stepped out onto the porch. The night air was cool, carrying only the soft chorus of insects and the yellow porch light spilling onto the dirt path in front of the house. He stood there for a long time, both hands resting on the railing, his eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. Images of his father surfaced in James's mind. A man who had spent his entire life wielding power, making decisions for others, and believing that everything could be arranged to his will. James understood now. What had just happened was no coincidence. It was deliberate. A cold, calculated act of control. He clenched his fists and drew in a deep breath. In the darkness, his gaze slowly hardened with resolve. He was no longer the son who stayed silent and obeyed. He now had a family, one that needed protecting. Would James confront his father directly tomorrow? And would his father finally abandon the intention of tearing them apart? Stay with us and continue on to the next episode.